Hello and welcome to my podcast called Innervation. Innervation was inspired by my previous podcast, Silence, where over the course of 2 years, I spoke every week with a total of 100 women from science, technology, engineering and mathematics, or STEM. I kept all of those guests anonymous so that we could talk openly and honestly about their lives, and we discussed their experiences, what they've learned along their life journeys, and their hopes and ideas for living fulfilling and contented lives. Because their identities were always kept so safe, the conversations on Silence were always so raw and transparent, and we didn't just talk about being women in STEM, but about everything. The topics that tended to come up were the same topics that people ask me about after I've given a talk in schools and colleges, or the topics that I talk about with my friends and family. They're basically the topics where we really let our guard down and show our vulnerability. So what I've done is sift through all the episodes of Silence to bring you my favourite sound bites about these certain topics. Each week on Innervation, I'll be reflecting on the perspectives that came up on Silence that I feel are actually pearls of wisdom that I found particularly provoking, inspiring and empowering, in the hope that they resonate with you too. This week is all about connection. I wanted to talk about this topic because seems to be at the root of everything. I feel like a lot of people, and myself included, are always seeking connection in whatever way. Like I do a lot of self-reflection and probably a bit too much analysis of the world, but it's just the way my brain is wired. And one of the things that I always end up concluding on is the fact that so much of what motivates us and so much of what drives us and so much of our ambitions and goals is actually just us wanting to have a connection with a community or with a person or with a label or a group, or we're always striving to be part of something. And I think it's maybe particularly poignant for me because I'm usually an odd one in a group. I mean, it's just been my familiar state to always be the odd one out for whatever reason. So in engineering, I was the odd one out because there were so few females, or growing up, I was the odd one out in my community because of my race. And as a result, I've always been trying to connect with others because I think that's what we fundamentally want as human beings. We just want to feel connected to other people. And, over lockdown and being isolated, it's really become apparent how important connection is. And, I'm really grateful for all the sort of telecommunications we've got where we can connect with other people around the world. But, I think with those kinds of mediums, whether that's Zoom or basically connecting through a computer screen, there's something very different about connecting in person. And I always sort of considered myself as being quite shy, reclusive and introverted, but I've really seen the benefits and the joy in having connection with others in person. And so I wanted to talk about connection in this episode because, I don't know, I wanted to sort of understand why we do it, and maybe give you some sort of points of discussion which might sort of help you figure out where you are on the whole connection spectrum. Maybe you absolutely thrive when you're connected with others, or maybe it's a source of a lot of your discomfort. I mean, for me, when I connect with others, I have to really be able to trust them. And I guess that comes from not always being able to connect. When you do, you want it to be a really genuine connection, something that is safe and secure. And so I wanted to see other people's perspectives from silence on what connection has meant for them. And so I wanted to start out with maybe a more sort of negative attitude towards connection. My guest from episode 61 talks about how a lack of connection in her sort of career and studies and education led to some really damaging behaviours. And, you know, perhaps what she experienced was quite extreme. But I think I wanted to start out by really delving into what happens when there isn't a connection, what the consequences can be. This from episode 61.
That's the thing is when you're in that graduate student environment, at least that I was in, where it's very toxic, everyone's insecure, everyone's putting on this facade, trying to live up to some ideal of what a physicist should be. And then people are belittling you. And then as a woman, I feel like at that point in my career, I didn't have that confidence and self-assurance to speak up against what was happening. And I did what my mother and my grandmother probably did before me, and which is, brush it off. But not just brush off. I actually developed an eating disorder. I developed chronic stomach pains. I thought I had a disease. But it was all that mind-body connection that led to this physical and mental illness. So, it got really serious for me. And I thought I was going to have a chronic illness I would have to live with for the rest of my life.
It's interesting that my guest talks about a mind-body connection, because I think that is really, really important to connect mind, heart, head, and body. And I think, there are a lot of people out there who have an expertise on realizing that, the mind and body and heart are very closely connected. I think that's what yoga is all about, where you're trying to create that connection between mind, body, and spirit. And I think when there is a disconnection between those things, it can really lead to some bad consequences. I don't think it works to just brush things off. And, she assumes that her grandmother and her mother brushed things off. But I think, there's been generations upon generations who have had to brush things off, and that has led to illness, and I feel like a lot of illness is caused by a lack of connection between mind, body, and spirit. But even more than that, I think illness is caused by a lack of connection with others. I think I think we are wired to be in communities, to connect with others, to seek help from other people, to have support, to be loved, and to be part of something. I mean, when you look at other species, fish swim in schools, there are herds, groups take care of one another. And I think, in some societies, people can feel so lonely and alienated. And I think that can really lead to a lot of unhappiness and suffering. And, whilst my guest from episode 61 is talking about this mind-body connection and probably seeking ways of trying to reconnect, I think the problem is much bigger, which is that she just didn't feel part of a community. This idea that her environment was toxic. She was very insecure because she was the only woman in a physics environment. That she didn't have other people to lean on, I think is really the most telltale sign of disconnection. And, I often don't think about that myself, that often I'm struggling with something, or something just feels really awful, or I'm just really, really uncomfortable because I'm disconnected. And when I think actually about a lot of the situations where I do feel very disconnected and I do feel very uncomfortable, what I'm seeking is to just connect. And I think, there are many reasons why we disconnect, especially, those age-old things of not feeling good enough, not feeling smart enough, not feeling funny enough, skinny enough, pretty enough, good looking enough, rich enough. There are just so many reasons why we don't feel like we should be connected to a group. And I think, it's a really worthwhile thing to identify in your own lives. Because I think once you figure out why you're feeling disconnected, you then have a fair chance of figuring out how to be reconnected. And this idea of, going and doing yoga, I think that's why there was so much this explosion of an interest in yoga, because I think people thought, okay, I'm very disconnected from my community. I'm going to go and get connected to myself. So I'm going to remain isolated and alienated, but I'm going to connect to myself. And I think that is really, really valuable. I think there's something so powerful and empowering in doing that. But I think, it's also about connecting with other people. And I think a lot of people who sort of do yoga get connected with their yoga community, and they find like-minded people to connect with. But I think we're also just seeking connection in all aspects of our lives. And so there's kind of no point in having a very strong yoga community and then going to university and feeling absolutely disconnected. I think what's useful here is to identify where you are feeling really disconnected. And so if it is at university or at work or even within your family, if you're feeling disconnected, I think it's really useful to say, okay, this is where my disconnection is happening. And so rather than getting into self-sabotaging behaviours or destructive behaviours or making yourself ill because you think the problem is you, having some compassion for yourself and realising that actually you're just feeling very, very disconnected from a certain aspect of your life, and then seek to reconnect. I spent many, many years, when I look back, extremely disconnected from the engineering community and extremely disconnected from the people I was with when I was studying, and people in my childhood that had a problem with the colour of my skin. And so had I known that I was massively disconnected in those areas, then perhaps I wouldn't have seen myself as being the major problem in all this. I mean, if you're disconnected because you've got the wrong colour skin, it was my way of thinking when I was younger to think, well, I've got the wrong colour skin. I didn't think, oh, I'm really not connecting with the people in this group. How can I seek connection? Whether that's finding people who are like me or just, that's why role models and mentors are so amazing, because, they're there to connect with you. And so, I guess the older self would tell my younger self, it's okay, you're just feeling extremely disconnected, and so seek connection somewhere else. Don't try and connect with people who are unsupportive and just mean and unkind. Seek connection in people who are kind and who are supportive, and that will help and make things easier. I think we are often looking for connection in our work, and whenever we talk about do something that you're passionate about, do something that you're really interested in, I think the reason why that works as a formula is because we have such a connection to it. If we're passionate about something, we have a real connection to it. And you know, I was talking to some mechanical engineering girls in episode 67 about sort of our motivation for going into, say, medicine versus going into engineering. And here's what they have to say about that point.
Yeah. I think we talk about being a doctor as almost like a one-on-one situation, and you feel the impact that you have on someone's life so like clearly. Right. But engineering, it's like you can make an impact on millions, billions,
but you don't necessarily interact with them or engage with them all the time.
But it just kind of depends on what makes you happy, what makes you like thrive. Is it that one-on-one connection, or is it maybe like possibly having that impact on a lot of people and maybe just not seeing it so clearly?
I think it can get really murky, the waters, when it comes to ambitions and professions and careers and sort of goals in life and things like that, because I think in striving to do well in your careers, often that can be really tied up with ego. And ego doesn't want connection. Ego wants to be the best. Ego wants to be better than everyone else. Ego wants to isolate you, you know, and that isn't about connection. I think connection is about truly connecting with people at the same level or on the same wavelength. You know, connection is not about comparing yourself to other people and to be better or less than, or, you know, to measure yourself up. I think connection is about, resonance. You know, with resonance, there are sort of two wavelengths of sound that connect and make, you know, a combined wavelength of sound that's better. And, you know, when an opera singer, the natural frequency of an opera singer's voice matches the natural frequency of a nearby wine glass, that wavelength becomes so big that it's able to smash that wine glass just through the vibration of her voice. And I think that's what connection is about. I really struggled with the idea of resonance when I was studying. And, you know, now I just find resonance is one of the most beautiful concepts for well-being. Yes, it's a physics and engineering term, but it's actually, like, in terms of mind and spirit, resonance is a really beautiful thing, especially in terms of connection. And so when my guests from episode 67 talk about connection, say one-on-one as a doctor, or a connection with millions and billions as an engineer, I think we really are just trying to connect with other human beings in whatever capacity. And it doesn't matter whether it's one or billions, you know, it's just the idea that your wavelengths are harmonized that is most important. And so when we do talk about finding your passion and finding where you're interested, really it's about who are the people you want to connect with. I know certain individuals around me that have literally shut down because connecting with other people was so painful that they literally just shut down and don't seek connection. And, you know, they strive to just be on their own because then other people won't hurt them, and they struggle to trust. And, you know, I myself relate to that because I experienced that. You know, when I was being bullied at school, I really just wanted to shut all of those people out. And as a result, you know, you end up kind of going numb because when you're shutting people out, you're really just trying to disconnect. And I think it's a really sad place to be in. It can lead to so many more problems further on down the line. My guest from episode 46 talks about connecting and the importance of connecting with communities and making networks. And I think that is the way out of suffering from disconnection, is to really just connect with other people without judgment, but really connect mind to mind, soul to soul, looking for the people who are on the same wavelength.
I think there was a time a few years ago when you kind of realize that you're going up the food chain in whatever community you're in. And maybe once you start doing this, you realize you want to join another community where you're at the bottom. And then you have to start moving up again in terms of like meeting people, making connections, making networks.
It's interesting when she talks about food chains because, you know, when you think of fish swimming in schools, they do that to enhance themselves as individuals. If there was just a lone fish swimming around, it would... that fish would be a lot more vulnerable. And, you know, this idea of food chains, you know, I think I see that as sort of talking about strength in numbers. And I think when you do make connections with other people and you do build a community around you, it can be really soul strengthening. But, you know, I'm always mindful of this idea of mind and body connection, because I think before you can start connecting with a community, it's also really important to connect with oneself, which is, you know, why a topic like this is on innovation, because it's very much about really sort of connecting all the different parts of yourself from within. And I think once you're able to do that, it's so much easier to make connections externally. So I think disconnection is definitely not a good thing. I think staying solitary is not healthy for anyone. But I think we live in a society where it's not about just having as many friends as you can and connecting with as many people as possible. I think what's really sort of the essence of connection is to truly connect with people, to truly be around people who are on the same wavelength. For me, I really feel that strongly. You know, I know a lot of people. I connect with a lot of people in terms of I have a lot of people's phone numbers. I've worked with a lot of people. I know a lot of people. But just because I have a large phone book, it doesn't mean that I'm actually truly connecting with others. And I can definitely confirm that when I have connected with people who are really on the same wavelength that I'm on, it is so beautiful. I mean, it's soul enriching to be able to connect with like-minded people, to sort of make friendships and connections and networks with people that really get you and you get them. And, you know, you aspire to be like them and they aspire to be like you. I think that can be just such a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I always look forward to those kinds of connections where there's just this understanding, you know, someone gets you and you get them. And so my guest from episode 16 talks about this, and you know, it's these kinds of connections that I think can really lift people up and allow individuals to be the best they can be purely through a mind, body, soul kind of connection. This from episode 16.
Definitely. I mean, I don't think I would have gotten through an undergraduate physics major without working with other people and just, you know, having those connections, just sitting there doing problem sets, but also just having people to talk to. I think I also benefited. I've had a lot of great advisors. My undergraduate advisors who I did a few different projects as an undergrad with them, and they were all great. And then my PhD advisor was fantastic and very supportive. And so I've really been fortunate because I've seen other, what can happen if you don't get along with your advisor, especially as a PhD student where that relationship is so important.
I couldn't agree more with that guest. I think connection with others is so paramount, and often I have disconnected because I'm trying to keep myself safe from other people. Like, I haven't wanted anyone to take advantage of my connection, and it can be really difficult, especially when you're younger. You kind of don't realize that people are maybe taking advantage of you, or are not really connecting with you in a healthy way. And I think it does take time and experience to figure out who's genuine and who's not, which is why I see some people who stay connected with friends they've made at school and things like that, because those kinds of genuine connections run really, really deep. And I think one of the messages that is coming out of this podcast, and that I need to tell myself, is just be really mindful of who it is you're connecting with, and be mindful of the quality of that connection. You might be connected with someone because they're a good person to know, or they will help you get places, but that's not really a true connection. It's important to network and to have those kind of transactional connections where someone's going to get you somewhere. But I think it's also really important to have genuine connections where it's not about what you can get from someone or what someone can get from you, but it's literally a soul connection where you just are really understood, you're really heard, you're really seen for the person that you truly are. And I think some people can actually go through life never having those sorts of connections because they're so focused on climbing the ladder of wherever they want to go and using people to get there. But it's also really, really important to have those kinds of soul connections. And maybe you have that with old friends, maybe you have that with family. But, I'm realizing just through recording this podcast that it is really, really important to have that, to really nurture those connections as best as you can. So I'm going to leave you with a quote from episode 46, who I think talks about connection in a really positive way. And I think she sort of understands the power of connection and how enriching it can be. So this from episode 46.
That's my mindset about everything, not even just science or academics. I think that I try to go into just a friendship or a new connection with anyone from any field, thinking that I can learn something from this person, I can become a better person, and I want to figure out how. So try to treat everyone like a role model, no matter what their background or gender, ethnicity is. Just try to go in with that, and that's really influenced everything about me, maybe my personality as well as my interests.
I think that's beautiful. I think she's seeking connections so that she can really understand more about what she's passionate about and what she's interested in. And for this guest, she really sees connection as a chance to get closer to her own truth. And, when you connect with people in a really authentic and genuine way, it's just so powerful. So, yeah, connection is good, but check your motivations for why you're connecting with someone. That beautiful, magical, divinely inspired connection with someone is really possible. And I think we should always be aware that those are the kinds of connections that we should seek, as well as, connections that are a bit more sort of superficial and logistical, because I think those are important too. But yeah, those more spiritual connections are invaluable. So thank you for letting me explore that topic, because actually I really needed to hear that for myself as well today. Thank you for listening. Please do subscribe to this podcast and maybe even rate and review it if you can. I'd love to have your feedback about this episode or any others that you've listened to, and maybe some suggestions for future topics for this show. It's all about self-discovery and evolution and getting closer to your truth on innovation. So be kind and loving to yourselves, and I wish you all a great week.